Gravity is usually described as the bending of space-time, a heavy bowling ball sitting on a trampoline. But what if that misses what's actually happening? Instead of a physical weight pulling on a fabric, gravity behaves exactly like an active data compression protocol running in the background of the universe. This is a 2025 paper by physicist Melvin M. Vopson. It introduces a concept called the second law of infodynamics, proposing that gravitational attraction actually manifests as a requirement to reduce information entropy. Think of information entropy as the amount of memory needed to describe a physical system. A chaotic field of scattered points needs massive processing power to track every single coordinate. But compressing those points into a stacked array drastically reduces the required processing power. The second law of infodynamics states that our universe actively seeks to minimize its own memory footprint. This diagram illustrates the concept at the cosmic scale.
On the left, a massive cloud of scattered cosmic dust has high information entropy. The universe has to work hard to track the position and momentum of every single speck. But when that exact same mass compresses into a densely packed solid planet on the right, the informational complexity drops. It is vastly more computationally efficient to track one singular object than billions of separate particles. The attraction between these particles is not a mysterious, invisible tether. The clustering of matter we observe as gravitational pull is simply the observable byproduct of the universe optimizing its own code to save memory. If the universe is actively calculating variables, processing data, and compressing code, we run into a severe logical dilemma. Software cannot run without hardware. There has to be a physical medium acting as the hard drive. For over a century, modern physics has operated on the assumption that the vacuum of space is entirely empty. Suggesting that space contains a structural medium capable of storing data has been strictly taboo. To find the universe's missing hardware, we have to look backward. We have to reopen science's most famous closed case, the concept of the ether. In the 19th century, researchers broadly agreed that the universe was filled with a medium called the ether, but they pictured it as a literal, physical substance. They thought of it like an invisible gelatin or a fine mist of tiny gears that supported the propagation of light. This photograph shows the exact type of 19th century laboratory where these ideas were tested by physicists Albert Michelson and Edward Morley in 1887. They aimed to measure the ether wind, the physical friction they assumed the Earth would experience as it pushed through this gelatinous medium. This image highlights the vintage metal apparatus they used. They bounced light beams in different directions to detect the mechanical drag of the ether. They found absolutely nothing. Space appeared to be perfectly frictionless. Because they found no friction, physicists concluded that the medium didn't exist at all. But that conclusion contains a massive flaw. If you try to measure a magnetic field by placing a standard glass thermometer next to it, the thermometer will give you a 0 reading.
The tool is entirely wrong for the phenomenon. The magnet still exists. Michelson and Morley successfully proved that there is no mechanical gelatin in space. They ruled out the 19th century version of the ether. But leaping from that specific failure to the conclusion that space is an entirely empty, structureless void was a critical scientific overcorrection. A theoretical approach called the A framework attempts to correct this historical error. It replaces the discarded mechanical fluid with an entirely different kind of substrate, a continuous dynamical field characterized by phase relationships and informational coherence. Think about how sound behaves. Sound doesn't require physical gears and levers to travel across a room. It simply requires a structured medium that can compress and expand to carry oscillations. Waves need a structure to move through, but that structure does not have to be a physical machine. The Aether framework proposes that the modern aether, spelled A-E-T-H-E-R, functions precisely as an informational substrate. It isn't a fluid you can drag or feel. It is a mathematical geometry that governs how fields relate to one another and how they maintain coherence across vast distances. This chart visualizes that concept. Looking at the peak of this 3D surface plot, we see the mathematical intensity of field coupling. This represents how phase configurations align and stabilize, creating localized zones of high information coherence. The universe's missing hardware was never going to be a tangible object you could put in a jar. It is this vast, invisible informational framework that dictates all physical behavior from the background. This model forces an obvious question. If the universe is a geometric field of flowing data, why do things feel solid? What makes up the physical matter of a rock, or a planet, or a human being? The A model explains matter through the concept of reality knots. When the energetic currents of the informational field intersect under specific conditions, they braid together, locking into tight, persistent topological configurations that maintain their stability over time. What we perceive as dense, solid particles, like the fermions and electrons that build our bodies, are simply these stable knots. They are persistent topological structures held together by deep coherence constraints in the underlying field. Physical reality is an illusion of density. Matter isn't an independent substance dropped into an empty universe. We are highly stable patterns expressing themselves within a continuous sea of data. Now, we connect these reality knots directly back to Melvin Vopson's second law of infodynamics. When trillions of individual data knots scatter across space, they demand enormous computational bandwidth from the underlying field. To prevent the system from being overwhelmed, the A field enforces a global rule. It compresses them together into larger, more efficient singular nodes. We never lost the medium of the universe. We just finally learned its true language. Gravity is not a heavy weight pulling us down. It is the universe relentlessly optimizing its own source code.